This is For Keeps, a podcast about collections and connections. I'm David Peterkowski. It was summer, 1992, New York City. I was fresh out of college, working at an entry-level job in magazine publishing that was about 20% work and 80% soul-crushing, dream-snuffing boredom. And because it was 1992, I didn't even have the internet to help kill the downtime. But that summer, I managed to stumble onto one hell of an engrossing distraction. I discovered what, to this day, may be the most captivating collection I've ever encountered. It was a collection that took up no real space as far as I could see, and required the collector to spend almost no money. You see, it wasn't a collection of things. It was a collection of apologies. Here's a little history. Way back in 1980, a secretive New York artist created a project called Apology. It was a phone line where people could call into an answering machine and record anonymous apologies for anything they'd done. Every 2 weeks, the artist, who went by the pseudonym Mr. Apology, would release a compilation of the calls he'd collected on the line, so anyone with the phone number could dial in and hear a sampling of the mea culpas. When you called in, you'd hear this introduction from the man himself.
Hello, this is Apology. Apology is not associated with the police or any other organization, but rather is a way for you to tell people what you have done wrong and how you feel about it. All statements received by Apology will be played back to the public, so please do not identify yourself. Talk for as long as you want. If you prefer a taped interview with me, leave a number. Thank you.
Mr. Apology promoted the line around town by putting up flyers, and it worked. He attracted some apologies that were incredibly compelling. Everything from the mundane.
I didn't call Ron's grandmother, and I haven't called my parents, and I didn't wish them the happy Thanksgiving. I'm tired of feeling sorry, so I'm actually apologizing. I apologize.
To the braggadocious.
Well, I had an affair with somebody without my husband knowing it, but truthfully, I don't feel guilty about it at all. In fact, I feel rather good about it.
To the truly chilling.
I killed a man when I was with my boyfriend, robbing a drugstore. And we killed him, but we didn't mean to. We went to the hospital and they said he was dead. We didn't get caught, but it's on my mind and it's a guilty feeling.
The apology line became something of an underground sensation in New York. It got covered in the local papers and the New Yorker magazine, and it even inspired a novel and a TV movie at one point. For years, it churned along, serving as a safe outlet for the remorseful and a riveting saga that entertained, for lack of a better word, lurkers like me. And then, in 1995, tragedy struck. Mr. Apology, whose real name was Allan Bridge, was killed in an accident while scuba diving off of Long Island. Allan was hit by a jet ski, the driver of which was never identified, nor did they ever come forward. At the age of 50, Allan Bridge had died, and so had the Apology Project. Not that it ever lost its cult following. It's been written about plenty over the years, and some of the line's old calls have even made their way onto radio broadcasts. And then, in 2013, another artist breathed new life into Allan's original vision. That individual, who has also remained anonymous, now operates a Google Voice number that works much like Allan's original line. He's even dutifully recreated Allan's original flyers and furtively placed them around town. But he's also promoted the line via social media, since we've all become hyper-connected through our smartphones and the internet. Even with our hyper-connectivity and our online visibility, the new line has collected its share of 80s and 90s style apologies by phone, about 100 or so and counting. And it's underscored the new Mr. Apology's belief in the value of owning up to one's mistakes. When I read that someone had rebooted Allan Bridge's Apology Project, and in a way that stayed true to the original artist's vision, I decided to reach out to him and request an interview. And surprisingly, and somewhat cautiously, he agreed to it. In our conversation, he told me how a chance purchase at a secondhand store led him to become a future Mr. Apology, how friends and family in the know feel about his work collecting apologies, and the fine line between being seen as a copycat and paying tribute to another artist.
Hello?
Oh, hey there, it's David.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
Good. So why don't we begin by hearing first about how you got inspired to set up the apology line. Can you walk us through what motivated you to start collecting the apologies of anonymous people?
Yes, I was in a thrift store and I purchased a CD that was This American Life, and I listened to it, and one of the stories on it was about Allan Bridge and the apology line. And I heard the story and I listened to the calls, and the calls really moved me. And at first it was just recordings that I enjoyed, but they really, I don't want to use the word inspired, but I was moved by them and I wanted to listen to more. And as I listened to the story several times, an inner voice told me that just because Allan is gone doesn't mean that the apology line needs to be gone. It sort of felt like what he created was bigger than even him. So I sort of, from there, took some steps to figuring out, can I make this happen? And it turned into the line.
And in terms of the timing, this was what, 5 or so years ago now?
Yes, that's about right. About 5 years.
And I'm familiar with the original apology line. I lived in New York in the 90s, so I used to call in every now and then and listen in. I'm wondering, have you had any interactions with Marissa Bridge, the widow of the original Mr. Apology?
Not personally. I do know that she was unhappy with what I was doing. I was interviewed for the New York Times, and the reporter also interviewed her, and she didn't really have anything nice to say about anyone who's brought the line back. I'm not the first person to bring the line back. It's been brought back with different numbers at different times, different people. Even in different countries, I know that there was an apology line in England at one point. Needless to say, she didn't like that anyone was bringing it back.
So once he was gone, that should have been the end of the line, in her opinion.
She originally encouraged others to sort of start their own thing, and has since drawn back on that stand. And in the interview for the New York Times, I think her main complaint was that no one was doing anything new with it. That no one was making it their own thing. I think she just wanted to sort of put Allan to rest, and, you know, his memory kept coming back through other people bringing the line back. She wanted people to do something similar, from what I gather. I never talked to her. But she didn't want them to do exactly what Allan did. And for me, it was important just to keep it very basic and simple and have the same kind of service that Allan provided. I didn't want to create anything new. I didn't want to take a piece of his idea and make it my own. I just wanted to bring the line back.
You wanted to stay true to the original idea.
Yes, because I feel it's not for me. It's for the people who call. It's for the people who listen, which is another reason why I like to stay anonymous. If anyone should be getting credit for this, it should be Allan.
Gotcha. Let's talk a little bit about some of the calls you've received. I'm not sure if this is the right way to phrase this, and you kind of stumbled on the wording a bit yourself, but what are some of your favorite apologies that you've gathered on the line?
I don't know if I have any favorites. I do know that when someone is sincere, you can really hear it in their voice. That's moving for me. Some of the calls have brought me to tears. I guess in terms of favorites, people that call to apologize to someone that they, may have in their eyes abused when they were younger, and they didn't know their person's full name, so they have no way of getting a hold of them. Those are really powerful and sincere. And then there's people who apologize to people who are deceased. That feels real powerful to me.
I want to apologize to Rose for not treating her better in her last few months of her life. I should have been kinder to her. I didn't realize she was going to die. So I got short-tempered with her, thinking she was going to live. I didn't believe how sick she was. And it was wrong with me, and it always stayed with me. And it's 25 years ago. And if this is what this is for, then I'm sorry, Rose.
Some people have asked me, like, shouldn't these people apologize to the actual person that they've harmed? And a lot of times, that's not an option. And so I think that's where the line really is beneficial to the callers.
Sure, it's better to apologize to you anonymously than to nobody.
Right. And hold that guilt and shame inside you.
Do you have a sense as to whether all of the calls you've received are from New Yorkers? I'm wondering if the publicity you've received has led to people calling in from, well, potentially anywhere in the world, I guess.
Yeah, I know that there were people calling from Massachusetts. I think I've had a few calls from Chicago. And when I first started the line, I was traveling a bit. And when I would go to other cities, I would flyer. So I was trying to expand my reach that way. And might have worked in some cases. You know, I haven't been to a lot of these cities in years, so I'm not sure if the stability of the caller's qualities is there, and I try to get it out online too. I've got a Facebook page and a Tumblr page, and on the Tumblr page I have calls that you can listen to. I haven't updated in 2 years. I guess that goes into another thing that we can talk about. I haven't really done any work for the line in 2 years. I sort of took a step back and I said, you know, I've done it for a year just to see what it would be like, and I'm not sure if I want to do this anymore. So I sort of put it on autopilot, and I'm still getting calls. But needless to say, my Tumblr page has not been updated in 2 years, but I might change that.
So how do you think these people are finding you over the past 2 years?
I'm not sure. Maybe from the Facebook page or press that I've done. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I have a semi-technical question. If somebody calls the line and apologizes for something that's illegal, are you potentially liable if you don't notify the police about it? Are there any legal issues at play?
If they've blocked their number, which I've encouraged everyone to do, and it's easy to do, you dial *67 before you dial the number. Your information is completely anonymous when I get it. I have no way of knowing who that person is, or there's no connection to me to that person.
Bob, I just want to say that I'm really sorry. You're in a coma and you're going to die. And I know it's your own fault, but I still feel like I contributed. I mean, I helped you get the painkillers you wanted and stuff. I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't have. I just, it was from the prescription, but still, if I didn't say anything, the doctor may not have given them to you. I just should have kept my mouth shut. But you were in pain, and I couldn't stand it. I love you, and I always will.
So even if you had a confession of some kind, there's nothing you could really do with it because there's no way of tracing it.
Correct.
What about your friends and family? Did they know that you're doing this?
A select group do. I'm not announcing it to everyone I know. There's certain people who know who I am, but most people don't.
What's been their reaction?
Most of the time, they're concerned for me. They're just, my dad said, be careful. I don't know what that means, but my brother is really supportive. But, you know, they're my family, so they're concerned for my safety.
Sure. And have you ever heard one of the apologies you've collected and wished that you could speak with the person who left it for you? You've talked about how moved you were by some of the original calls you heard.
Yes, and some on the line, as it is now, if you call, the recording says if you'd like to talk to someone in a recorded message, leave your number and I'll call you back. That hasn't worked for me thus far. I've tried, people have left numbers and said call me back, and I've called them, and I wasn't able to get a hold of them for whatever reason. They don't know my name, so me saying, you know, it's the apology line doesn't really mean anything. But yes, I've called people back without any success.
Interesting. Maybe they just want to be heard.
Yes. And a lot of the callers, I don't know who they are, but they sound young. They sound like teenagers or preteens, kids living at home. So I wouldn't imagine me calling someone's parents and them knowing who I was, if their child is called in the line.
Gotcha. So as of now, you've been collecting the apologies and posting the individual audio files of each one on your Tumblr page. And that's a bit different from the original apology line, which would compile a bunch of calls and present them as kind of a program that people could call in and listen to in one sitting. So I'm wondering, why not compile your calls and present them as a podcast? Wouldn't that work?
I haven't thought of podcast. That is a great idea.
Well, I'm a podcaster. I'm full of great ideas.
Yes.
Something to think about, because that way people could periodically, download the latest batch of calls, listen to them, keep it going every few weeks or so.
Yeah, that's a great idea. If I do that, I'll have to give you credit for it. Executive
producer.
Okay.
So you've had your apology line now for several years. How long do you think you'll keep it running?
Well, like I said, I haven't even updated anything in 2 years. I put it on autopilot, and it's sort of it has a life of its own. This interview is probably going to motivate me to get back into it and maybe even Flyer again. But like I said, I sort of put it on autopilot to see what would happen. Here we are.
And do you have any bigger plans for the line or the calls? Maybe some sort of an art installation?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I don't want to make any money. I don't want to... It's important to me that the apology line be connected to Allan, the person who created it. So I'm maybe overly cautious about all those things. The integrity of the line is important to me, and I'm not versed in navigating those waters that you mentioned. So maybe I need to speak with another blogger, someone else who has more experience with this.
Mm-hmm. Seems like there are a lot of potential avenues for expression or creativity that could be leveraged, I guess.
I did think of an installation of a payphone, like a New York City payphone, except when you picked up the line, you would just hear the calls, people calling, and you couldn't make any call. That was the only idea that I had for, I guess, a quote, art project, unquote. But again, I don't want to create anything that is going to potentially have my name attached or take anything away from Allan and his work.
So it sounds like you're being as respectful as you can to Allan and his original vision, even though his widow isn't terribly thrilled, apparently.
Yes. Yes.
So here's kind of a big picture question for you. What would you say you've learned about the human condition from running the apology line? Is there any big takeaways on human nature, or are we all just a big hot mess?
I think the biggest thing is that the power of forgiveness and people verbally saying what they're feeling. I think there's tremendous power in that. I think some of the calls that I get, it seems like these people haven't said these things out loud, maybe even to themselves.
I also want to apologize for not being there for my dad when he was sick. And I want to say that I'm sorry that he felt like he had to do what he did.
You can hear it in their voice that they're realizing what they're saying. That's so powerful to me. That was the sort of hammer, the nail that really solidified the line for me, just the power of forgiveness and a platform for people to express things that they're afraid to express, maybe out of fear of prison or the person or people that they're telling this to, their reaction. Or I feel like there's a lot of guilt and shame in people that confess certain things, and I don't think anyone should live with guilt or shame. If you did something wrong, then maybe there are consequences, but a lot of time I feel like people think of themselves much worse than they actually are.
And the apology is one step in sort of righting that a little bit.
Yes. And hopefully, if it is a person that they could apologize to in person, hopefully this can be a step towards that.
Okay, one last question. Since you're remaining anonymous for this call, is there anything that you'd like to apologize for?
Oh, boy. Great question.
I was worried it would be a question you get a lot.
I've never got that question. What would I apologize for? There's so many. I'd like to apologize to Allan Bridge's widow if I've caused her any pain or grief.
That's a good one.
Maybe I was just going to say maybe that's a cop-out, but yes, I am truly sorry to her for that. Not my intention.
Yeah, imitation and flattery, we all know. They go together. Okay, well, Mr. Apology, if that's your real name, I want to thank you for agreeing to talk with me about your ever-expanding collection of apologies and human frailties on display. It's really fascinating to hear your backstory and your motivation. I appreciate you filling me in.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that the new so-called Mr. Apology agreed to speak with me. He pushed past his apprehension and told his story. And you've got to admit, his apology to the widow of the original Mr. Apology was clearly heartfelt. You also can't beat that symmetry. One Mr. Apology apologizing to the widow of the original Mr. Apology? I swear you can't make this stuff up. After I spoke with him, I felt like there was more that could be done to help ease the mind of the new Mr. Apology. So, being a believer in the power of forgiveness, and a busybody, I took it upon myself to do the one thing that the apology line's never done. I brought the apology directly to the person who was wronged. Yep, I reached out to Allan Bridge's widow, Marissa Bridge. Think of her as Mrs. Apology.
Hello?
Oh, hi, Marissa. It's David.
Hi, David. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. So maybe we can start by hearing your recollection of how Allan got the apology line off the ground. Do you recall the impulse that led him to start the project?
That's a good question. I think there were many reasons, one of them being that he had been a shoplifter his youth and teenage and I think young adult years, and he ended up getting married in his early 30s and moving to New York, and I think he felt like he was growing up and he wanted to give up those ways which he sort of looked at as juvenile and, you know, they're not good things to do. So I know one reason was that he wanted to make amends for himself and his own behavior and to apologize. He had also done a couple of sculptures that had moral stories to them. He did one called Crime Time, which was, there was a show called Beretta back in the 70s, and the theme to it was don't do the crime if you can't do the time. And he inscribed that on the piece, and that was a veiled confession. I didn't know him back then, but he felt that was a veiled confession to his criminality. And what you did was you spun a wheel of chance, and you either got a marble as your spoils or you got your hand caught in the machine for 30 seconds, like a criminal getting caught.
Sounds more entertaining than an episode of Beretta, from what I recall.
I don't know. Allan liked Beretta pretty much, I think. But, you know, he had a lot of reasons. And then his marriage broke up. They ended up only being married like 2 years, and I think he felt terrible about that. And so I think there was a lot of reasons that he started it. But, you know, like with any great art idea, the light bulb just goes on. You know, you've got a lot of things ruminating in your brain, and all of a sudden you hit on it. And I think it must have been just like that for him, that subconsciously a lot of things were going on in his mind, and it just came to him.
And from there it became a telephone-based project.
Yes, it did. I met him about a month after he started the line. So I wasn't there at, you know, the very first few weeks, but I met him right afterwards. It was a telephone and a very, very basic answering machine. Answering machines were new technology back then. I didn't even know anybody that had an answering machine. I mean, it was very exotic that this guy had an answering machine and he was using it for an art piece. It was really extraordinary. And I thought I was sophisticated in the new art ideas that were happening, but I had never, this was way out of anything I would have ever imagined. So it was pretty cool. And yeah, the original answering machine had a very short outgoing message, so he couldn't play any calls. He could only leave a brief message saying, leave your apology, and I will play them back at a time and place to be advertised. There was no way to have callers, hear the calls until many years later when the technology improved.
And you didn't run for the hills when you saw this answering machine with these crazy calls coming in?
No, I thought it was fascinating. And the funny thing was he lived there. I didn't move in for a couple of years, but he had this big loft space, and it was very roughly put together by Allan. And it was a basic bathroom, a very basic kitchen, and a workspace, and then a lot of open space. And he would leave the answering machine on at high volume, and just whenever the calls came in, day or night, he would hear them. So it was really hard to sleep because the calls were coming in, and he'd just pop up and listen to it. But it was interesting. We were young, so it was cool. It was a lot of fun. And to lay in the dark and 2 or 3 in the morning and hear a voice come into your space and this person's pouring their heart out, it was just quite extraordinary. I've never experienced anything similar to that in my life. I mean, I guess the closest thing is a priest in a confessional where it's dark and people are on the other side of the screen and are confessing to you. But this wasn't that intimate, but it had a lot of intimacy to it. And the telephone does have a certain kind of intimacy, which I think is lost because people don't talk on the phone anymore. By and large, they email, text. The phone used to be quite, it was our only method of communication, a technical way. It's kind of interesting that the new guy is also using the phone, that he hasn't gone to a website or something like that he's doing the audio, I think is admirable because most people don't do that anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of a lost art, the phone call.
It is.
So back in 2013, the New York Times wrote an article on the so-called new Mr. Apology. And in that article, you were quoted as saying, and I'm going to throw your words back at you here.
Yes. No, I read it this morning. So I remember what I said. But go ahead.
I'll read it anyway. It says, quote, "I feel like the sands of time are burying Allan, and those who are inspired by his genius but don't transform it into their own artwork are robbing his grave and skulking away in silence," unquote.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's been 5 years since that article appeared, and I'm wondering, do you still feel the same way?
I do not feel the same way. I was doing my research and I reread that, and I didn't even remember saying that. And I was like, oh my gosh. I understand why I said it at the time, because the person that started the new line didn't contact me, or not that he needed to ask my permission, but he copied Allan's poster word for word. And I only found out about it because some friends had seen it on the street. And so that was what upset me because, he could have just asked me or not copied it word for word or said, hey, by the way, I'm doing this. So I was pretty upset back then. But now I have a different point of view. I think that what he's doing is pretty pure. He's not trying to get financial gain from it. He is just putting the calls out. And I don't even know, if there's any way that the callers interact with each other or anything like that. But it seems like his motive is pretty pure. So at this point, I just wish him well because it is a hard thing to do. It's a lot of work and no financial reward. So to do something like that out of the goodness of your heart. And as I reread the New York Times article, it said that he was a former drug addict and it's one of his 12 steps that he's doing. And so that he's still doing it, I think is admirable.
And I have to tell you, I spoke with him not too long ago, and he's still got the line going, and he's still acting anonymously. So I asked him, sort of in the spirit of the line, if he had anything he'd like to apologize for. And he told me without too much hesitation that he'd like to apologize to you for causing you any pain or grief, and that it was definitely not his intention to do so.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I accept his apology. That's fair. Absolutely. And, like I said, the time that has gone by, he's sort of kept the spirit of Allan's line. And Allan did want people to start their own lines. And that was part of his goal, was to have the thing spread out for a lot of reasons. One is that he felt like more people would be able to utilize the service. And the second thing was that he felt like it was so much work that if there was other stuff going on, he wouldn't have such a burden, of doing all the work himself. So, I think that especially this time has gone by, I think that Allan would be happy about it, that he's kept it going, and he does give Allan credit, and it's a pretty pure form. telephone calls, and I think all that is really positive. And I hope that people get a benefit from it.
The line ran for about 15 years. I'm talking about Allan's line, and collected, I'm guessing, thousands of anonymous apologies, but surprisingly little of those calls have made it into the digital world from what I can gather. Have there ever been any plans to create an online archive of the calls Allan received?
There has been a lot of stuff that's been pitched and proposed to me over the years, and things just for one reason or another have never worked out. I do have another person that I'm possibly working with to do something. The phone calls are not digitized at this point. They're still in cassette tape form, although I have made copies of the cassettes. So they're not digitized, except for, there's a few. I think there's maybe all total about 45 minutes. But the archive is really incredible. And one of the reasons is because of Allan's involvement in it. I mean, he was a personality on the line from day one till the end. So it's important, and I think it's an important archive for humanity, really. I was going to say New York or America, but people called from all over the world, and I do think it's a really important archive. But I have yet to take that next step and digitize the tapes and do something with it. But I am talking to someone now about doing that. But I have talked to people about it before, and it's never panned out, so we'll see. It's a big project to digitize it.
I would imagine it's expensive, time-consuming, et cetera, et cetera.
I did make copies of the cassette tapes, and that took 2 years. I mean, I didn't do it full time, but, it was in my spare time. It took 2 years, so I'd imagine this would take that long. The original cassette tapes are in incredible shape. They're in perfect condition. That's
great. And hold on to them. Keep them in a dark place. I don't know if sunlight.
Actually, I mean, they've been in hot and cold, the original tapes, in kind of every environment, and they survive. They're still in good shape.
Oh, good. When I talked to the man who's started sort of this newer version of the apology line, he has these calls and hasn't really done anything with them. And I had suggested that he do a podcast where every couple of weeks or so he releases sort of a compilation of the calls he's received. And he seemed to like that idea. I don't know if that's something you could do as well, going through the archive once it's all digitized.
Yeah, that is something that I've thought about. I think it would be an incredible podcast. But again, it's the amount of work. Because Allan did programs. Every 2 weeks he did a program. So he already made the podcast programs. I mean, you could add some commentary or whatever, but they're done, basically. He did one every 2 weeks for 15 years. It's already edited. He did it the way he thought it should be done. And I have thought about that.
It's all sequential, too.
It is. And there's it's a narrative. It's not just putting the calls up, but there's so much interaction among the callers and Allan that it's the first digital community that ever existed. Not digital, but pre-digital. I don't know what you'd call it. I guess it's an audio community that only existed really through the apology line.
He was innovative for sure.
Yes, he was. He was.
Well, Marissa, I really want to thank you for agreeing to talk with me about Allan's work. I think he was clearly ahead of his time, and whatever we can do to unbury his work from the sands of time, we should be doing.
Yes, I agree.
And I wish I could thank him for creating such a captivating and thought-provoking project. I certainly lurked and listened in quite a bit when I lived in New York at the time.
Did you ever leave messages?
No, I led a wonderful life. Nothing to apologize for, of course.
It's really interesting because from time to time, I run across people who have been callers, and it's really interesting to talk to them. People write me letters. Now they'll email me, and I have a apology line Facebook page and an Allan Bridge Facebook page, and people reach me through there, which is really easy. So that's about it. I mean, hopefully, before too long, something good will happen with his archive.
Yes, let's hope. Okay, well, thanks again. I do really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Take care.
All right. Thanks for calling me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, new Mr. Apology, if you're listening, it sounds like you're off the hook. Time and reflection have softened Marissa Bridge's stance on the new version of the apology line, so you should feel no more guilt about collecting anonymous apologies the way Allan Bridge did in the 80s and 90s. And Marissa, if you're listening, please dust off that old collection of cassettes with the original apology line calls, and do it soon. I honestly think that you're sitting on the next big true crime podcast sensation. Unless the new incarnation of the Apology Line beats you to the punch and produces its own podcast. For Keeps is a production of me, David Peterkovsky. Thanks to my anonymous guest for talking with me about his growing collection of confessions and contrition. And if you want to apologize for anything, don't hesitate to give him a call. He can be reached here in the U.S. at 347-201-2446. Be sure to dial *67 first if you want to block your number and preserve your anonymity. And to hear more of the calls he's collected, visit apologyline.tumblr.com. And thanks to Marissa Bridge for sharing her memories of the original Apology Line. The image of her and Allan lying in a Manhattan loft in the dead of night, hearing those eerie calls blaring on the answering machine, was really something else. The show's theme song is by the band Still Flyin. The closing theme is by Eric Frisch. And additional music for this episode was by Marcus Hornt and Carl Vercade. You can email the show by writing to me at forkeepspodcast@gmail.com or follow the show on Instagram and Twitter at forkeepspodcast. Thanks for listening to For Keeps. Until next time, keep on keeping on.